Okay, when a disaster hits, how do you actually get help to the people who need it most? Well, today we're going to look at Ukraine, which is the site of the biggest humanitarian cash response ever. We're going to break down what happens when aid is just given as straight up money and, what that really means for the people on the ground. Let's dive in.
So first, let's just get right to the heart of it, right? To the human side of this whole thing. What does it actually feel like to get this kind of help when you've lost pretty much everything? I want you to meet Lyubov. She's a mom of 7, and when the shelling in her Frontline village just became unbearable, she and her whole family had to flee. They got to the city of Sumy with basically nothing, and then they had to face this massive challenge of, how do you start over? How do you create any sense of normal for your kids, especially when 5 of them have to do school online?
And this is where that aid came in. The family got cash assistance directly from UNICEF. And as the report says, this support literally became a lifeline. But it wasn't just about surviving, it was about dignity. It meant they could buy what they decided they needed most. Things like school supplies, clothes for the kids, and food.
And look, Lyubov's story is just one of millions. Check out this number. By the end of 2023, humanitarian groups had handed out a staggering $1.87 billion. This is what they call multi-purpose cash assistance. It's direct financial help, no strings attached, so families can decide for themselves what they need. So we're not talking about some small niche program here. This is a massive, coordinated lifeline.
So that brings up a really important question. Why cash? Right? Why not just send food parcels or blankets or supplies? Let's break down why giving cash has become the go-to method for aid. Well, the easiest way to answer that is to just ask the people it's supposed to help. A recent survey found that 62% of households in Ukraine would much rather get cash than any other kind of aid. And the reason is actually pretty simple. People want to make their own choices.
And this chart just spells it out perfectly. With cash, a family can decide if they need medicine more than a winter coat, or if they need specific food for a kid with an allergy. It gives them power, it gives them dignity, instead of making them feel like they're just getting a handout. And on top of that, all that money goes right back into the community, supporting local shops. And honestly, from a purely practical standpoint, it's just way more efficient than shipping and storing tons of physical stuff. But, it's not a silver bullet for every single problem. This quote from a woman in Mykolaiv, it adds a really crucial bit of reality. She got about 16,000 hryvnia, which is a few $100, but her house is gone. So while that cash is a huge help for day-to-day things, it's really just a drop in the ocean when you're facing that level of destruction. So how does all this money actually get to people? Well, the system isn't some single well-oiled machine. It's actually a lot more like a patchwork quilt, with different pieces all stitched together. You've basically got two systems running side by side. On one hand, you have the Ukrainian government's own social safety nets, things like pensions or disability payments. And on the other hand, you have all of these international humanitarian cash programs, the ones we've been talking about. And what happens is people often end up relying on a little bit of both. Take Dorina and Serhiy, for example. Both of their homes were damaged. They got cash from humanitarian groups to help with repairs, and that money often showed up way faster than government aid could. So it ended up complementing whatever support they were getting from the state, helping them fix a roof before the winter hit. And that really gets to this key insight from one of the reports. The humanitarian cash often fills in the gaps that the government system has, but, and this is the important part, it does so unintentionally. It's not part of some grand coordinated plan. It's more like this necessary but kind of chaotic arrangement where two separate systems are just working in parallel, helping people piece together enough to get by. But here's the thing. Whenever you have a system that's like a patchwork quilt, you're gonna have gaps. You're gonna have holes. And sadly, it's often the most vulnerable people who end up falling right through them. So the big question is, in this huge aid effort, who exactly is being missed? Well, the research gives us some really clear and honestly worrying answers. So the reports point to a few specific groups who consistently struggle to get help. Members of the Roma community, for instance, often face discrimination and might not get information through the usual channels. You've got older people, especially those who live alone and maybe aren't great with technology. And then there's a massive hurdle, paperwork. If you lost your documents in the chaos, it's incredibly hard to register for anything. And believe it or not, some of the rules can exclude people who are really struggling, like folks who have a tiny income that's not enough to live on, or even families who have 1 or 2 kids instead of the 3 that many programs require. And the problem isn't just about who's eligible, it's about information. Just let this sink in. For some people, it took half a year just to find out that a program they could have qualified for even existed. And by then, it might be too late. Okay, so knowing all of that, how do we make the system better? The good news is the reports don't just point out the problems, they offer some really clear, practical solutions. So the recommendations really fall into three main buckets. First, better design. The aid groups need to work way more closely with the government to intentionally fill the gaps, not just accidentally. Second, clearer information. That means things like a single, central website and using the channels people actually use and trust, like local groups on Telegram. And third, just make registration easier. Work with local officials, simplify the darn forms, and be more flexible if someone is missing a piece of paper. But beyond just changing the process, the reports really zero in on a crucial human element. One of the best recommendations is to use trusted local mediators. We're talking about community leaders or specific mediators from the Roma community who can get the word out and help people navigate the whole confusing process. It's such a simple, powerful idea, right? Meet people where they actually are. So when you look at the whole picture, the experience in Ukraine teaches us something really fundamental. It shows us the incredible power of just giving people cash, but it also shines a bright light on the real challenge of all humanitarian work. The question isn't just about how to get money out the door fast. It's about how we build a system that's truly fair, one that actually sees every single person and puts their dignity first above everything else.